Welcome to the Beacon Way Executive Series podcast. Take a look behind the scenes of business and digital agency experience with Adrienne, Jennifer, and Ken. These award-winning executives of Beacon Media and Marketing share personal stories, deep insights, and hot takes, and even a few controversial perspectives on leadership and business in the current timing of the world. And we are back with episode 2 of our executive series. And today's podcast, we are going all into conflict resolution, right? We talked a lot about in the first episode, conflict and communication styles, but I think that this is something that's worth really digging into because I think there's a lot to unpack, both between partnerships, but then also team culture and departments and leads to their team, and really making sure that you're creating the right culture of constructive conflict and really encouraging it, but then learning from it and then making it better for the whole team in the future.
Our culture has gotten very scared of conflict. It's become a dirty word, conflict is. And so it's something I talk about a lot, even in our interview process during our culture interviews, because I'm like, I got to be honest with you, we don't shy away from conflict. And it's not conflict for conflict's sake. It's got to be constructive conflict, or then it is just conflict for conflict's sake. But I would say it's something Jennifer and I avoided a lot at the beginning, where it was uncomfortable. And I don't know if part of it's even a woman thing, but we tend to be a little more on the agreeable side and tend to instinctually want to smooth things over. Some of us less than others. But I think conflict is, when it's constructive, that's a whole different world. And I know for me, at least personally, reading the book 5 Dysfunctions of a Team was transformational for me to even mentally shift toward conflict is a good thing. And in fact, it's necessary. To be avoided, you end up in a weak organization. And the story that always comes to my mind is there was a biodome experiment that they did, and all the trees kept dying. And they couldn't figure out why all the trees kept dying. And what they realized was there was no wind. There was nothing for the trees to have to stand up to. And that was actually a vital part of the tree's growth. And when they started creating wind in this biodome, the trees started living, and not just living, but thriving and growing, because there was actually something they needed to push against to be stronger. And without that, their roots didn't grow deep and they just topple over, or they just would die. Any organization, you need that constructive conflict. The wind wasn't doing damage to the trees necessarily, although extreme wind would do that, but just enough conflict, enough something for those trees to have to push against to grow, to become stronger, to go deeper and build deeper roots. And that's what I think of about Beacon when I think of constructive conflict. And that's what I think about with our executive team.
That's a great, I never have heard that story. That makes so much sense. Even just the effort that I put in this last year, and now I'm back again, I'm so excited, into building muscle, like understanding that process of something is breaking down to get stronger. I think that is like a clear principle that works, whether it's physical, emotional, business. You have to push. You have to have something you're pushing against, or you are weak.
Resistance creates muscle, or the belief that you can push the weight or move the weight or any of that, right? Through that challenge comes change, is what I've come to believe. And I think the cool thing about conflict too is just understanding you're coming through the layers, right? We have layers of decisions, questions that we ask amongst ourselves as we address that conflict. The first and most important one is, what is most valuable for our clients? If I think I'm arguing or debating with you, Adrienne, on what's most valuable for the client, and you're completely pushing back, and you also think it's what's most valuable for the client, even though we're on completely different perspectives, that's what's going to give us the most resistance to do and create the most strength for whatever we're trying to fight for from each side as it relates to the company. And that's just, it's a fun, honestly, I love that discord, honestly, between us. At the end, I remember, Jen, when we were in the last executive, I literally thanked you afterwards. I think a lot of people, that conflict starts to rise up and they're like, no, I don't want to get it. And then what ends up happening is they're not growing their roots deep because they're not facing that wind.
Yeah. We all still have a different perspective oftentimes, and that pushes us farther than any one of us individually. Because if it's this, I used to tell Jen when she and I met, was very frustrated as a graphic designer because I felt like I was in like an Excel ball to back to myself all the time. It was just my own ideas coming back to me, and I could only go so far. But as soon as Jennifer and I merged, and then just as soon as you came into the picture, Ken, and then as soon as Michelle came in, now all this different beauty in that kaleidoscope of all of us bringing our life experiences, our perspectives. And now as we keep growing in the company and each one of us is growing in our roles in the company, that also brings a perspective. And so to watch all of us passionately advocate for our perspective and our point of view.
For the last number of years, I've described myself as a recovering people pleaser. And for somebody like me, and for anybody who's listening that grew up that way, that was part of their identity, so much of my, even how I'm wired and built, is I love to provide services for others. Like I love to uplift others. I love to encourage. I love to cheerlead. That is just part of what makes me super happy in life. It's part of why I like marketing. So to move into that position, I had to make a very conscious choice of, yes, this is really uncomfortable. So part of it is just that choice. You have to make a choice to say, if I'm going to move into leadership, if I'm going to move into a level of growth and really to be a leader of a company, not just build a company, but to actually lead it and grow and scale it, you have to have the ability to have honest conflict and conversations. And the book lined it out for me, where it was like, okay, I can see this is going to be incredibly uncomfortable for me, but here is a pathway to do it. And I love the safety of knowing that we can do it in the environment of our executive meetings. And then we can just go on, like where we can get to a solution. And it doesn't mean we're all going to end up believing that opinion, but we all leave going, yeah, this is what we're doing. And then we all support each other. So for anybody like me, please read this book. Like, it is absolutely a game changer if you decide this is the path that you want to take. I would say that one of the first conflicts that I struggle with the most was probably knowing that I have that gift of discernment, that I would kind of sense when things were in trouble with a client or sense when things were in trouble with an employee, but I couldn't always articulate that in the most professional way. And so it was actually learning to trust you guys that I could just say it and would be at least a listening or an agreement. We would take that seriously. And that was a huge risk, because that's really the truth, right? Whenever you say that you don't agree with something, or you're putting out an idea that maybe hasn't been put out before, you are risking. And you have to be aware that's what you're doing. I know I have this information. I'm actually not doing what's best for Beacon. I'm not doing what's best for our team if I don't bring this information forward.
And that's my perspective on it, right? As you just said it right there. The first decision or layer is what's the most valuable for the client. But then the second one is what's best for Beacon. And so if you're at a stalemate at what's best for the client from your perspective, maybe move to that second layer and what's best for Beacon, and making sure you're not allowing your assumption or your lack of confidence, maybe without having all the facts and figures, even though your gut's telling you to do that, just pushing for that. And I will say that what I have found, because I have a personality that's, I don't mind debating. I don't mind having discord. I don't mind being unagreeable. That's been something that is just a natural strength of mine. But what I do that can be stifling to others. And when you're trying to uplift it, and I have this conversation in our quarterly meetings all the time with all of our staff, is I want them to debate more. I want them to bring up their perspective. You've been in a couple brainstorms and I haven't heard you say more than a couple words. I want you to bring more to the table. And the minute you're encouraging that person to bring that discord, and they do, I don't care if it's good discord or bad, you got to celebrate the heck out of it, right? And I remember even with you, Jen, when we were working through that, you were having a hard time articulating your gut. I remember Adrienne and I just celebrating no matter the outcome of, yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. And then we would ask questions and then you would go further. And most of the time your gut is spot on. I'm willing to go the depth of it based on the trust that we have between each other to find out what is at the root of your gut and then be able to let it play out from there.
Conflict is tough, especially with the two of you guys. You're both incredibly strong personalities. And I guess I've discovered I am a strong personality myself too. I didn't necessarily know that about myself. But again, it's the different perspective. And if you really know that you know that all of our goal is the same. Then, and I love that about the book, because it brings that back to the perspective. Like you said, we've lost this ability in our relationships to have healthy conflict. And I think it's because there's no trust on that basic level of, hey, we're all going for the same thing here. Like and especially the three of us, or even with Michelle too, the four of us, like our goal is to provide the best value for our clients. That's number one. That's always the filter we're trying to go through. But if we know that's ultimately the goal, then all the conflict is doing is trying to get us closer to that. And it becomes less about each other and more about that focus.
Right. At the end of the day, if our values align, we can trust in each other that the values align, and whatever we come to consensus on, then we don't agree with it. We all have that trust, that foundational piece that we all are striving for the same goal, because we all have the same values, and we're all trying to really live out those values. And so when that is the foundational piece, then it's okay that we don't all agree. And it's okay to be able to have consensus and move forward in a specific way. But when there isn't, you don't get to a point of consensus and moving forward. And I personally feel like that's why a lot of leaders are scared of conflict, because there isn't an alignment on goals. There isn't alignment on values. There's not that foundation. Painful divides a team more than unites them. And so that would be one thing I would really encourage readers to again read the book. But just that is the biggest differentiator for me, is that you have to have alignment on your values and your goals first. And you have to end the conflict with, what is our consensus now that we've all gotten to be heard? Because that's the other piece of the conflict. Whoever's facilitating it has to make sure that everybody's been heard and everybody has gotten a chance to truly get it all out, if you will. Because if somebody's sitting over there feeling like they didn't really get heard, I know, Jen, you would express this in the past, that you would feel like I would kind of steamroll over, and you did like there was space to be able to truly share your, and to go deep. So that was a big challenge for me, is to make sure that I was holding space for you, for Michelle, because Michelle's felt that too as she's joined our tight-knit group of three. How does she feel like she can express her opinions? And so I think that's, for me, some of the main things is that you have to have alignment on values and goals, and you have to make sure that everybody's heard. A consensus on
even going further into that too, right? Like the herd part makes so much sense. And I think it's important for all people that you have to do that for yourself. You have to speak up and make sure you're heard, because if there is a consensus and you don't get heard, you're still going to have that in your back pocket in a negative way. So at least if you could be like, I got it out there, even though I still don't agree with the whole, but we have the agreed value. And I think the other part to it that I would say is, and this really connects a lot into like relationships, is like, there's no scoreboard between us, right? So even if you did disagree, but the values align, it's not like you're keeping a scoreboard. Like, I disagreed here, and this is one check for me as a partner, and then this person's got a couple of checks over there. There is no scoreboard, because we're all on the same team. And if we're keeping score against each other, then we're not, again, like you're talking about, moving in the vision of the values of the company and where we're going. We're actually in conflict of each other in a way that isn't productive. And I just want to make sure people are understanding as they're trying to imply this, because these are difficult things to unpack and imply, but like no scoreboards allowed. It is all, it's Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all in that thing.
I want to share something that is a little bit of a warning, I think, if you don't go this route. So we've had many missteps over the years of me not sharing stuff. And it was almost a cycle of, I wouldn't share, and then something bad would happen. And I'd be like, oh, I knew about that months ago. Adrienne just, oh my gosh, what is your problem? Like, why did you tell me that? And I knew this was going to happen. And I really had to check myself on that. What was the motivation for me doing that? And part of it was fear, for sure, of just like fear of conflict, fear of not being heard, and that risk. And that's painful. But I think a lot of it actually was pride and like self-preservation. It was almost like, if I don't put it out there and I just keep it to myself, like I'm not risking anything, I'm protecting myself. And then I just realized how terrible that was. That was so awful for the outcome. That was so awful for us moving forward. And there was people hurt in the midst of that because maybe there was an employee that we hired that really should have been offboarded week one, and they were here for 3 or 4 months, and then it ended up really hurting the morale of our team. You think of the cost of doing conflict, you think of the cost of operating this way, and yes, it takes courage, but the cost on the other side to me is most likely failure. And it's a cost of just a lot of missteps along the way that didn't have to happen.
I would love to unpack a little bit for those two, because we're talking a lot about executives and peers, but I think it's also really important to like nurture this conflict even amongst departments, inner departments, and even the teams of those departments. Because I think that if you don't, you will start to create some of that siloing, or even so much you get so stuck in the lanes, like you can't see the forest for the trees. And so one thing that I know that's always really important is that you're coming alongside people in that. You're supporting them, you're celebrating them. And then even when they do bring up discord, that's something you disagree, you call it out respectfully, right? You encourage the action, but maybe not through the right filter. And in really getting that to go too, because I think once you start doing that at the executive level and their team starts seeing that, you start to see things getting brought up, fixed, and implemented without you even having to touch that, which to me is always an exciting thing to see from a leadership side of things.
It dovetails into a key component in a healthy culture is that failure is not bad, because that's the other piece that people are scared to have conflict, scared to bring their ideas forward, because, well, what if everybody has consensus that that's the way to move forward, and then it's an idea and something fails? And, so really dovetailing that don't fail, we succeed or we have a piece. And, that is when things go a little sideways or a lot sideways. And how do we face that? How do we deal with that as a team? But that's also got to come from the top down, that there's not a punishment culture around failure, but that it's an opportunity to learn. And I think that that's really value of the team, that they're going to feel a lot more comfortable to have conflict, make decisions, act on it, pivot on it, all of that kind of, if they know that, the leadership team's a wrecking ball. There's those mistakes, because there's always consequences one way or the other, but that we look at everyone.
I think it's very anti-typical work too, because what we're basically asking people to do is care about something beyond their own self-preservation. So if you think about most businesses, you've got departments. I've had lots of experience with sales and operations working against each other. There's always going to be an element of that, because you've got the people doing the production, and then you've got the people bringing in the sales or bringing in the revenue. And there's always that conflict piece. But I think that we've gotten to this point. I think you're part of this, Kim, which has been really good. It's one of the most constructive environments I've ever been in, where there is natural conflict in those two things, no matter what. You're trying to get the client everything that they want, and you're advocating for that, and they want this 50-page website or whatever. But by encouraging that conflict and getting them to press forward, what I've seen is that it really ends up becoming, now we're aligned on trying to solve this problem together, versus like them just complaining about sales or sales complaining about production, which is what I've seen in almost every other organization I've worked with. Those two sides consistently, if you think about the self-interest of sales versus the self-interest of operations or production, they are in conflict naturally, right? That's like a natural setup. But if you are bringing up that conflict, okay, here's the situation. This is what's best for the client, and then this is what's best for Beacon. How do we both come to the solution together? I have seen so much movement in our company for that, of people thinking beyond themselves and thinking of that higher picture. And now we're like attracting people as part of our team that automatically think like that. Think of Olivia and people in that mindset. It's such a beautiful thing. There is going to be that pushback, because clients always want the moon, right? Of course they should. That's their job. And then our job is to figure out how to make that happen, and what's realistic expectations, and how we can be a good partner. It just seems like we've gotten to a really good and better place than I've experienced before.
One, it's funny too, because the first role is CRO, right? But my second role is operations. And those are the two things that I have the most passion for, is sales and operations, which I know, Adrienne, you've had people look at you side eye when you describe me. I think my first thing that I think of is to what Adrienne said earlier, is that just have the mindset that there is no learning in success. And as success is a good thing and it feels awesome, we don't actually intrinsically learn something to your core that will benefit you for the future like you do from failure. Failure is the only place that you actually learn and grow, which I'm addicted to growth. I'm addicted to challenging myself in every aspect of life. And so I think early on, I found this conflict that sales created resistance for operations and operations created resistance for sale. If I constantly was able to cycle between that, sales was constantly getting better because operations was creating these challenges that I had to learn from that made my sales better. And then vice versa, and operations was having to get better from. To me, I just saw those things as interconnected. Like you can't have operations without sales, and you can't have sales without operation in any business, right? You need clients or growth to be able to have the operations work, and the operations can't work unless sales works. And so to me, it's just from a very early age, I saw that as this really good tug of war in a positive way. And my mindset has always been to learn from failure, right? And then especially as I'm managing teams in that is to teach them to have short-term memory loss. And I always use the phrase use and lose, right? You use the failure and then you lose it, right? So you don't hold on to it, because sometimes people start to stack those failures, if you will, and you don't want to encourage a fail, but what you want to do, let's learn from it. Let's not repeat that failure. Let's now be better because of it, and then let it go. And it gives this freedom for people to fail. It gives this excitement for people to try new things. And then what you start to see is your team, both in sales and operations, actually might do stuff better than you would have. And then that's my first time to write in and celebrate them. I know Michelle can advocate that for many times, is she would do something, she would finally take the initiative to go do it herself, and she'd do it. And then she'd recap it with me. I'd been like, honestly, that was better than what I would have even done. And then the win that gets in their sales, when that happens, it then just perpetuates the process. And so that's what I've seen in that, and why I've really advocated for that early on, because I just see them, one can't live without the other. I think that can conclude a phenomenal executive session around conflict and how to do it amongst obviously partners and in their teams.